All right, how's it going? This is the first podcast edition, test edition of It's About King of the Hill episodes in chronological order, but I'll probably name it later. I am David Carr, and this is my lovely wife,
Carolyn Carr.
Yep, and we're with our newborn baby girl too, and she is cute, but she can't talk yet, so she will not be contributing to the installment. All right, so we will of course start it off with Season 1, Episode 1 pilot. Aired on January 12th, 1997. This being the first episode. I've seen this episode several times before on TV, on DVD, things like that. But what's funny watching it this time is that it really is a complete show from episode 1. You have a lot of first appearances here. Obviously, Hank, Boomhauer, Dale, Bill, Bobby, but then also Luann, Peggy, Nancy Gribble, John Redcorn, Joseph, Ladybird. Even Cotton Hill gets is in a flashback appearance late in the episode. One thing that I'm curious about, I've wondered about this for a few years, is every version that I've seen of, I guess, the early episodes is it almost looks like they transposed like a newer intro on top of it. You watch it, it looks like the intro is the clear animation, more of like the season 2, maybe even season 3, 4 style that they had. So I'm curious if anyone knows that. Was it always like this because it looks weird, or is it just really hard to track down the original version with the original intro? Because I've only ever seen it in this form, so I was curious about that. Right. Any thoughts on general thoughts on this episode, Carolyn? We can dive into some of the details.
I liked how in the very beginning you get your stereotypical like yep, mm-hmm.
Yep.
I liked how that was like the first thing you see.
Yeah, very iconic opening.
Right. And I also thought, I don't know how you feel about this, but I always liked in the first episode when they start talking about Seinfeld, and they talk about it being a show about nothing, and that's something that everyone says about Seinfeld, the creators say about Seinfeld, and I think that King of the Hill arguably is a show about nothing as well. Sure,
a much different show about nothing as opposed to, Seinfeld very, single, cosmopolitan. This is, sort of a rural family working class show, which I think there were not many of back then in the 90s, late 90s. I still don't think there's many today. Absolutely. So you get a great introduction to Hank, Boomhauer, Dale, Bill. It's funny. It's like, Seinfeld and King of the Hill. I almost think of King of the Hill being very much like a post-Seinfeld era broadcast, network comedy.
Right.
But there was a few little overlap. Seinfeld went off the air in 98. This started in early 97. Anyway, you get some great, little overarching plot lines, which the series was really good with, especially in the first 6 seasons, before Mike Judge took a step back. You have talk of, Luann's parents fighting, so you know why she's staying at the house. You also have, some really great emphasis on Hank's sort of outlook on life, even though he is kind of like a down-to-earth, he's an unpretentious guy. He definitely has a problem with, incompetent people at, the large megalomart, which is sort of a thorn in his side across the entire show. They expand on that later. He can't even find the WD-40. He says, where can I get the hammer? He still doesn't even know. And another fact, I think that store clerk guy, I think he's in future seasons.
Yeah, I think he is.
Yeah, and of course, the dreaded county social worker who thinks that he is, physically abusing his son Bobby, as well as his wife Peggy.
And he's like the ultimate dweeby looking, like annoying.
Yeah. Doesn't
have their accents. Like, he does not fit in at all.
Yeah, and it makes me wonder, like, what personally happened to Mike Judge that, like... Cause I feel like this is kind of a running theme in a lot of his work, this kind of know-it-all pencil pusher people.
Right, like misunderstanding their lifestyles and like how they live their day-to-day lives. Yeah, but it's interesting seeing it hammered home so much in, the very first episode, because we certainly see more, not to say the show's repetitive, because it's not, but very much of, this social worker from Los Angeles. That character type does certainly appear more in the future, as well as kind of Bobby's maybe exploiting of the situation, as well as Peggy just kind of,
maybe getting suckered in a bit, being a bit naive to the situation.
Yeah, like she always gives in to what Bobby wants, and Hank just kind of sighs and deals with it and just does what she wants him to do.
Yeah. And then certainly, one thing that I had, full disclosure, I've seen every episode, so I do kind of forget things sometimes.
Yeah, David got me to watch pretty much every single episode. Other than that, I'd never seen them before, so.
But, the thing with, Nancy Gribble and John Redcorn, so you get introduced to Dale first, and you find out that, Nancy... You see Nancy, I guess, at the baseball game, and then you find out, Nancy and Dale are married. And then of course, John Redcorn.
Well, Dale's being like a total butthead. He's like demanding. What is he saying? He asked her to like bring him beers.
Yeah, and he's a total conspiracy theorist at that point. That's kind of his character.
Right. Right. Well, she says she has to go do like migraine treatments or something.
Yeah.
And Dale is even like, it's kind of weird that you still have to go like after all this time, or he specified like a length of time they'd been doing it, like she'd been going to these migraine quote unquote migraine treatments. Yeah, and then John Redcorn's playing some like 80s song. Like,
he's playing a Foreigner song.
Oh yeah.
He's playing Hot Blooded.
That's right. Yeah. So. Yeah, I like that he made an appearance too.
Yeah, and then of course the kicker is that for the first time you see the original Joseph character before he went through puberty. But anyway, you see the original Joseph character, and of course it looks like John's son. It's not Dale's. Yeah. Obviously, such an iconic part of the series, and I did not remember that it had been launched actually in the pilot episode. And then also. One thing is, I did like that they did have emphasis on the Luann character. Luann, I think that character certainly evolved in the show, but she was heavily involved in the early seasons, with her just general family dysfunction, chaos. She kind of finds a safe harbor at the Hill household. Hank, not a huge fan of Luann.
No. Well, she's just loud and obnoxious and emotional and just ridiculous. And as you learn, she's not the most intelligent person on the show.
Right. But yeah, I mean, it's impressive that, how much of a good storyline that I feel could have fit in anywhere in the series. It doesn't feel primitive or rudimentary. It's a great episode of the show. And then you have intros to characters like Bill Dauterive. You don't find out a whole lot about Bill. But that's elaborated on maybe a few episodes later in the season.
Mm-hmm. Well, and also what I forgot to say too was like with Dale, you were talking about Dale being a conspiracy theorist because they showed Dale and they showed Boonhour right afterwards.
Yeah,
and I think Dale immediately bashes the social worker down when the social worker's inquiring about Hank beating Bobby or something. He's like, what? And and then Boomhauer is the same way. He just totally is just no, but then he starts giving him crap about other governmental. What is he? He's mad about the government not acknowledging something. He inquired about something in particular.
Yeah. What's funny is Dale always seems to have sort of this. I don't know if it's a vendetta, but he always seems to screw Hank over for no reason.
Right.
Dale is not a particularly good friend. At least Bill and Jeff Boomhauer. Somewhat leave him alone a bit.
Right,
Dale crashes his truck into the garage. It's just kind of almost just an absurd buffoon in this episode.
Right.
But I liked how I don't know if it really established his extermination company in this episode, but you get a big part of his character, which is kind of the conspiracy theory.
He's
angle.
Anti-government, he thinks everyone's out to get everyone, so he would obviously not be receptive.
But so is Hank. You kind of see two sides of Hank is very much kind of old school, no nonsense guy, conservative politically. You definitely get that impression from this episode.
Right.
And then you kind of see Dale, which I guess you could say that about. He's kind of almost like the dark underbelly of that.
Dale's just not a very likable person, but yet you love his character because
you start to feel sympathy for him.
Well, you feel sympathy, but you also he's not wrong. A lot of the time, most of the stuff he says, it has some truth underneath it, and that's why they all kind of look to him for the weirdest things.
Yeah.
So.
And Bobby is certainly a little menace in this episode.
Oh, that really... I mentioned to you, too.
They kind of pivoted away from that. That's the one character that they changed, I think, the most after the pilot.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, after we watched it again, I immediately said, Bobby is never this mean in, like, the episodes I most distinctly remember, you know? Like, he's actually kind of a likable kid.
He's more charismatic.
Right.
He's mopey, but still charismatic.
Right, like, he's annoying, but he's not, like, maliciously annoying. He's just, like, kind of weird, I guess.
Yeah, and he, but one thing that I definitely like is that you do see how, like, there's kind of that enabling via Peggy of Bobby's antics, you know?
Well, and that's the thing that I didn't realize that in the very first episode they talk about how they could only have one kid.
That's another great point. Yeah. That was certainly a comedic storyline.
And then they all seem to know it. Like, even his friends
Hank has
brought
no
it
secrets.
up.
Everyone is kind of... there's a lot of gossip in small town Arlen.
Right.
Know, especially between... you've got Peggy and her friend Nancy in this episode. A lot of, like, strange character designs, like small character designs that, you don't really see in few episodes. A lot of cartoons do that. A lot of animated sitcoms do that.
Well, it is funny to see that you talking about, like, the actual physical drawing, like the...
For the main characters as well as, like, the extras, that people that you don't really see. They don't look like King of the Hill characters. Almost more look like, of course, like Beavis and Butthead.
They're definitely not refined at all.
Yeah. Which is fine. It doesn't... It by no means looks bad. I mean, this aired on Fox in early 1997. It was perfully fine.
Right.
For broadcast television. They rerun all these episodes... on Adult Swim currently. It looks fine, I don't think that they've gone to the trouble of remastering the old seasons like they did for South Park or anything like that.
Yeah.
But they look fine. I don't really have any real issues with the animation quality.
Yeah, it's not like dramatically worse or anything like that. It's just like kind of like, whoa, like when you first look at it.
Some of the character movement is a bit stiff.
Yeah.
And
the voices too are not exactly there. It's almost like because it was the pilot, obviously, they kind of were testing out certain things, like Boomhauer's voice. He kind of articulates almost better in this first episode than he does in future episodes. Just things like that you kind of notice, or the way Dale talks. Dale has a shrill... I think his voice is shriller in later episodes to make it more distinct.
Dale, his voice, as well as personality, is just very shrill and, of course, paranoid.
Yeah, and I don't think he was as much that way in the first episode. Yeah. Not that he was in it a lot, but...
Yeah, I think this episode, as well as other episodes, has a bit of a slower pace. I think certainly the show... 1997, what was even around back then, you had... The Simpsons, of course.
Right.
Well, I'm sure this was, compared to its fellow Sunday Night Fox show, The Simpsons. I think it actually, I think this was in the 8:30 slot after The Simpsons.
Mm-hmm. I'm not sure.
Wikipedia can double check that for folks. But I believe this was 8:30 and Simpsons was 8. And I don't want to get too far into like which episodes had the decimal point ratings and this and that. 'Cause a lot of info is publicly available, but the show did well, obviously, and it did even better in the second season. I think it briefly overtook Simpsons. So Fox had some hits going, formed some momentum. They had the NFL package. They had Simpsons was going well. I think Married with Children was maybe still on the air, maybe in its last run, as well as X-Files. So I think King of the Hill kind of fit nicely into that more irreverent tone that they had. It's hard for me to picture a show like this getting a fair nod on ABC or CBS or NBC or something like that.
That's true.
But in the wake of King of the Hills and some of these other late 90s show successes, there were other shows that were launched. So I think it is a very influential program. People really love the show. I love the show, obviously.
Yeah, like I grew up with it. Like my family would watch it and stuff, and I would try to watch it, but I always joke around with David about how, like, the style was just such a... I don't know, it was intimidating to me. Like, I guess as a child, it's kind of a weird appearance. I don't know, it was just a very different animation style, and I didn't understand the storyline because I didn't bother to sit and watch a full episode, so... But then, as an adult watching it, you do appreciate all the intricacies of the episodes.
It's a different pace and a differently acquired taste. I know that I was not actually a huge fan of the show when I was younger. The local Fox affiliate, for example, they used to do a Simpsons hour of 6 p.m. to 7, so 2 Simpsons episodes. Mm-hmm. I probably started watching The Simpsons around 2001. So, it was good because you got, better episodes of The Simpsons, mm-hmm. not the newer ones. And then all of a sudden, maybe around like early 2002, they flipped it to where it was Simpsons at 6 and King of the Hill at 6:30. And I was like, what is this? I don't like this King of the Hill show. I didn't really watch it much in the Sunday night block or whenever they aired it. I think around that time it was maybe airing in like reruns on the FX cable network, but I didn't really watch it there either. But it took some time. When I was a little bit older, I definitely started enjoying it more, much more than some of its competitors. I do think that there was other shows we don't have to get into that I think have more of like a frantic kind of like modern day Hanna-Barbera mm-hmm. attitude to them that King of the Hill doesn't really have, but I think that's refreshing.
King of the Hill's more like real time.
It is. It's more of a realistic show, and I think a lot of the humor comes from really knowing the characters and knowing, especially like I said, for the first 6 seasons, a lot of overarching plot lines. A lot of it's certainly not a show we have to like. If you miss something, you're not going to know what's going on the next week. But there is a lot of little things, real little Easter eggs in this show that are good for repeat viewing, which I've certainly done a whole lot of. But I think this show has stood the test of time. It stopped airing new episodes in 2010,
which is not that long ago.
Not that long ago. It was, in my opinion, kind of unceremoniously pushed aside. I wish they had a better send off for it. The last four, they kind of did like a double episode series finale, and I think September 2009. But then they kind of burned off 4 episodes in like syndication on Adult Swim, things like that. I didn't think that was a very good send off.
No.
There was a brief rumor that Mike Judge was going to send the show to ABC. They were doing the Good Family show at the time. Mm-hmm. Tragically, Brittany Murphy, she died, I believe, at the age of 32. It's tough to say if the show could have or would have or should have really gone on, at that point. But I think the show has really stood the test of time. DVD sales I had read were a bit anemic. I think Mike Judge said when he was asked about it, that they rerun the dang episodes on local syndication on FX and Adult Swim so often that he thought maybe it was hurting DVD sales. Eventually, I think all 13 seasons are out on DVD. It's a great way to see the show. I've seen some of the seasons on DVD. They got some good bonus features. So it's a show that's out there. It remains, I think, in the pulp culture zeitgeist. It remains, and certainly a iconic show for primetime animation fans such as myself, fans of really any type of animation. I think it was definitely a show that was nurtured well by Fox for most of its run. Got a little shaky towards the end, but that can happen with long running successful shows. I'm not gonna go over like the history of King of the Hill for like every episode. I just thought it'd be a good launching point,
right?
For the pilot episode. But yeah, the show is great. And it is fascinating to see how many of like the early foundations were laid in the very first episode. You get a great idea of what this show is about, who the main characters are. I think it does everything that a pilot episode of an anime sitcom should do.
Yeah, and I think also like with Hank, he really becomes a character that you want to sympathize with, like all the time. Like, and even introducing his friends and like how idiotic they react. I mean, I'm not trying to bust on his friends because they're really great characters, but he was getting so frustrated with them. The whole episode, if you watch it, is all about him getting really frustrated with people around him, and that's kind of the way the whole series is.
This episode is kind of a microcosm of the entire series.
Right. If everyone makes him mad in this episode, and then passers-by judge what he's doing as if he's some like crazy abusive like overly irritable person, and he's irritable, but he's very, if you watch all the episodes, you'll know he's actually pretty mellow based on things that happen. Like, he handles things pretty well. But, you know, he gets really irritated at his friends because they're working on his truck or something.
Yeah.
And it's like they're busting on Fords, and I don't know, he starts yelling at them because, you know, they're not being very helpful. They're just kind of talking and not being useful. And then Bobby's acting annoying, and Peggy's annoying. Just builds and builds. Yeah, it's just, yeah.
And that's what I think is really interesting about this show is that, you know, by and large, Hank is right in the show. He's seen as the sympathetic character, the wise character, the hardworking character. There's some other shows where it's, you know, spend a day in this other character's shoes. No, like this show is Hank's world. You're in Hank's shoes in almost every episode. And very rarely, you know, is Hank proven wrong, or does Hank, you know, get his comeuppance for something that he did. So I think it's very, you know, Mike Judge voices Hank Hill. I'd like to believe that, you know, Mike Judge maybe has similar outlooks and philosophies of life as Hank Hill.
Well, and also with Hank too, he's a likable character, and you want things to succeed for him, but, you know, things work out for him in spite of the fact that he's, I don't know, like, everything around him is so imperfect, but his personality remains the same, and he perseveres, and he still kind of wins at the end of every episode. I mean, I'd like to say he wins. You know, he gets he
stands true to his convictions.
Right. He doesn't change anything about himself. Yeah. And the people like that. The other characters in the show rely on him for that.
Yeah.
So.
One interesting thing that I guess in terms of establishing this universe, they did leave out not a whole lot of talk about you know, propane and propane accessories.
In the first episode?
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
The Strickland propane stuff. It shows up later. There's obviously a lot of great, you know, comedic material there. But I think, you know, very, very impressive pilot. These shows, especially back in, you know, the late 90s, animation budgets were bigger. There wasn't as much time slots being available. They can really sink on you know, a week pilot, a week first few runs of episodes, you know. Mm-hmm. They just get lost in the shuffle sometimes. But this show obviously didn't. It lasted 13 years, 259 episodes. I think it's a great show. I don't think it's really much dated at all. I think it stayed, you know, relatively current.
Oh yeah, if you told me that this episode came out a few years ago, I would have believed you.
Yeah. And with some, you know, punch with the dialogue and amateur days, this could have been like a season 12 or 13 episode.
And unfortunately,
you know.
there are, well, it's not unfortunate, but the thing that dates it are like the little references to real life, like politicians and things like that are going, which are still like, we're at the age where we can still remember, like, which ones they're talking about, and it's not foreign to us. Yeah. But
they did have some topical humor in King of the Hill, but it wasn't, you know, like, the focus every...
Right. It's like, sprinkled in occasionally. Yeah. But, you know, I think you've always talked about how you love King of the Hill because it's a very wholesome show.
I think it is. I think there's really nothing wrong with it for family entertainment, you know?
Exactly. Like, the end of the episode is just Hank telling Bobby that he loves him no matter what he does. So, like, even if Bobby's a little jerk and busting things up and being the obnoxious boy that he is in this particular episode, I don't think Bobby's as obnoxious in future episodes, as I said. I mean, he kind of
He gets roped into a lot of... He's very impressionable.
Yes, I was going to say, he's very gullible, and, like, he'll do things that he shouldn't do, which... So maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. I don't think he's as vindictive as he is in this episode, in future episodes.
Not towards Hank.
Not towards Hank.
He gets upset about other things. But Bobby's a great character, very kind of unpredictable, but also I think he does have a lot of the same values as his dad.
Right.
And I don't want to rag on Peggy. Peggy's a nut. She's kind of a lunatic.
Yeah.
You know, but she's a good character too. There's not a whole lot of chemistry between Hank and Peggy.
It's
but
really
it's like
odd.
but it's like revert, but like it works because like there's so little chemistry. Because there's no chemistry. There's not a lot of chemistry between them because it's like they seem like real people. Dale and Nancy have horrible chemistry.
Right.
Bill can't interact with anyone. Boomhauer you can't even understand half the time.
Right.
But it just seems like a real show with, you know, with real people.
Right.
It's not flashy. It's not high concept. It's just kind of a show about, you know, this guy and his hardworking guy and his family, and I don't want to say it's dysfunctional because it's not like there's dysfunctional.
There's not that much going
family.
on, like
yeah. So you know, I think it's certainly a great program.
And they show a lot in just the scene layouts. Like, you can imply
some good establishing shots.
Establishing shots, or like even you brought up the Nancy stuff with John Redcorn, right? Like, right?
Yeah.
And I was just gonna say how she'll jump in the car and they get off, and you can tell that there's a relationship between them.
Exactly, like that.
But they don't say a word, But I mean, I'm really impressed with the way they did lay out those. Just, I don't know, even the expressions of people. Like, everyone in the show has a straight face, but you still can read the emotions of everyone, and it's just really, I like that. That's cool.
Yep. So that's about the pilot and brief history of the Ryzen, mostly Ryzen, a little bit of Fault Day and King of the Hill. Mm-hmm. If you're listening to this and you want to see the show, it's on all the big. I don't think it's on any what I call them buffet streaming. It was on Netflix at one time. It hasn't been on that for a while, but it's a la carte, Amazon and what have you.
Probably iTunes.
iTunes. I actually don't know if it's on iTunes. I
thought it was.
It could be. Check iTunes if you want to get it on iTunes. Yeah,
we've definitely been in the past. We've talked about certain episodes and we've been in the mood to watch them, and so we just buy them on Prime.
Yeah. So, but on top of that, it's always on. It lives on this
Turn on your
days,
TV.
And Adult Swim could be on right now. They like to kind of. It's a good 8 p.m.
They'll pepper
type
it into
show,
different.
a little bit family friendly.
Yeah.
So that's about it in a nutshell. This is a show that I don't think people should avoid. I don't know how you could have avoided it for this long. At this point, my gosh, this series debuted over 20 years ago. That's staggering.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So, but bottom line, definitely check out this show. If you can, start with this episode. It's a great establishing episode to begin your King of the Hill adventure with.
Right.
All right. Anything else you'd like to add?
No, that's it.
All right. Well, this was fun. I hope that it was entertaining and enlightening for you, and we will see you next time.
Bye.